Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow.
Well, welcome to the broadcast, everyone, and this is a very special broadcast because we're going to be talking about what's going on with Israel, at the United Nations, where our American Center for Law and Justice office in both Strasbourg, France, and Washington and New York are constantly engaged, and now the new attacks, the latest attacks on Israel, coming from the United States, a known ally of the Israelis. Well, that used to be the case, but there's an op-ed today. It's a fascinating op-ed that is in the Israel International News that talks about, this is from the family of a victim of Palestinian terrorism, was killed in 1995 because the Obama administration has redefined terrorism and is blaming Israel for excessive force when Molotov cocktails, rocks, even bullets are aimed at Israeli soldiers. What do you want them to do, Mr. President? That's the substance of this particular op-ed. But we're going to be joined in just a few minutes with a very good friend of ours, the ambassador from Israel to the United Nations, Danny Danon, former deputy speaker of the Knesset. He's someone we've worked with for a long time, and we are working front and center on this. And Jordan, people need to know right now that the ACLJ, we're not just talking about defending Israel on these two UN resolutions that are coming up, including the redefinition of the borders and the condemnation of Israeli building what are called settlements, but it's Israeli territory. We've been working on this at the UN, fighting for Israel.
Yeah, at the UN, at international courts and tribunals. We have the office in Jerusalem with Israeli staff and a legal team there on the ground. We have assisted both persecuted Christians with Israel's help, which should be highlighted by our United States government instead of, like Vice President Biden, condemning Israel. Should be highlighted the fact that it was Israel who stepped in to help persecuted Palestinian Christians that we have represented before with our office in Jerusalem. But we now see, Dad, when you see the buildup with Vice President Biden and the comments he made to the liberal J Street, which is a pretty anti-Israel, definitely anti-Netanyahu government group, and you see those comments, you hear the statements, the very weak statements that we're waiting to see what kind of proposals are made at the United Nations. This is a key time to have Ambassador Danon on because Israel is taking this very seriously. So do we.
Yeah, and then we're fighting this out right now at the United Nations.
Well, and to underscore what Jordan said, the United States knows exactly what these resolutions will look like because they have seen them before, and there has been a 7-year effort to walk back the United States position on this. This is just the last step in that process. The U.S. knows what to expect. They're just pretending that they don't.
I want to encourage you as we get ready to take a break to do two things. One is support Israel. We've got a petition up right now that we encourage you to sign. Let the ambassador know that we're standing with them. You could do that at aclj.org. As we stand for Israel, you join with us in this fight. When we come back, we're going to play you a historic statement on the floor of the General Assembly, Security Council, actually, at the United Nations. You're not going to want to miss it. But again, to stand with us, go to aclj.org, support our work, but also stand with Israel. aclj.org.
Israel is facing a new and grave danger, this time from the United States. There are reports that the Obama administration will use the UN Security Council against Israel. It's a renewed attempt to force Israel into a dangerous position, giving up key concessions before negotiations even begin and mandating that Israel accept indefensible borders. Israel must not be forced to negotiate with a Palestinian Authority that empowers terrorists. We can't allow President Obama to betray our ally, Israel. At the ACLJ, we're mobilizing our legal teams here and in Israel. We're preparing critical legal letters, documents, and filings at the UN, in Congress, and with the Obama administration. You can take a stand for Israel by signing on to our new petition right now. Defend Israel. No talks with terrorists. Call now. 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or you can add your name online, aclj.org.
Back to the broadcast, everyone. There was a historic moment on the floor of the United Nations. We've been front and center fighting against these attempts by, unfortunately, the United States in some regards, but also the UN and others, to force these settlements of the borders for the Israelis. And I will tell you this, we're going to be joined in just 30 seconds by Ambassador. In fact, we've got Ambassador Danone now. And I want to just, first of all, say that Danny Danone has been a friend of ours for a long time. And you've heard him on this radio broadcast around the country and around the world for a number of years. But he is now the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. Ambassador, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Jay. It's a pleasure to be on your show again.
Let me play for our audience a little bit of what took place at the United Nations just a few days ago. I was on the phone with Ambassador Danone just a couple of days ago and told him that I think this was an historic moment on the floor of the United Nations for the defense of Israel. One of the most eloquent, direct, clear, concise defenses of Israel. And you got to listen to the Palestinian Authority's representative to the UN because it tells you the whole story. Here it is.
You should teach in your schools. You should stop the hatred. You should stop naming streets after terrorists. We condemn all terrorism in Hebrew, in English, in Arabic.
We condemn the killing of all innocent civilians, including Palestinian civilians. Do you do the same?
You're paying the families of the terrorists.
Do you do the same?
You glorifying terrorism. Shame on you for doing that.
We don't.
Shame on you for glorifying terrorism.
Shame on you for killing thousands of Palestinian
children. For
not
saying we condemn all acts of terror, period.
Well, there you have it. What a statement on the floor of the UN. And Ambassador, I told you this the other day, and I mean it. It was a phenomenal statement. Let me ask you for context here for our audience. There is a move right now. We're working on this through our NGO that is recognized at the UN, an NGO at the UN, our European Center for Law and Justice, on these redefinition of borders. And the Palestinian Authority is trying to push this through the UN, and then you've got the so-called, stop building in settlements, which is Israeli land and territory, which is absurd to be like telling the United States don't build in Manhattan or Washington, D.C. What's your sense of what's happening? You're the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. What's your sense of where things are right now?
Jay, the Palestinians are working in two fronts. In Israel, on the ground, they continue with the incitement. We saw when we heard the Palestinian representative that he is not able to condemn terrorism publicly, right. And while they are inciting and instigating in Israel, they come here to the UN and they try to promote resolutions at the UN Security Council to condemn Israel, to bash Israel. And unfortunately, we see that some people are cooperating with them. Instead of telling them, enough with the incitement, if you want to move forward, go back and sit with the Israelis in the region. Unfortunately, we see that they are being welcomed here, and people are not demanding them to stop the incitement.
Let me ask you this question, because you started your argument, and I'm a Supreme Court lawyer, so I really appreciate the way you laid this out. The first thing you said is you should teach in your schools. You should stop the hatred. You should stop teaching hatred in your schools. Now, I have been down into Israel many times with you many times, and I have been there when I've heard some Palestinian kids in the streets talking about the blood, and these were 10 and 11, 12-year-olds, the blood of the Jews running in the streets, and that would obviously include my own family. So let's talk about what they are teaching in the schools and this kind of, the way they'll say one thing in English and another thing in Arabic.
Well, Jay, I always be to the Security Council the family of Dafna Meir, who was stabbed at the front of her home by a 16-year-old Palestinian. And when we arrested him, he confessed, and he said it. He said, I decided to kill a Jew, any Jew, after I saw a television program on the Palestinian Authority television. So actually, when they go to school, they hear the hatred. When they come back home, they open the TV, they see programs against the Jewish people. When they get older and they go to the mosques, they hear sermons against the Jewish people, and we see the results. The result is the stabbings, the shootings, and that is the reality. That's why we need to start with the basic. We need to start with stopping the incitement.
We are talking to a very good friend of ours, the UN ambassador from Israel to the United Nations, Ambassador Danny Danone, who has been a real champion, let me tell you, for defending his country. And I appreciate so much his efforts, and I'm thrilled that he's in New York. We're going to talk about the BDS movement in a moment, but I want to stay on this UN focus because we're working aggressively at the United Nations. Jordan, I know you had a comment and question for the ambassador.
That's right. And I want to remind people, too, Ambassador Danone has been a good friend of our broadcast, been on our television programs and documentaries we put together. And as he has risen through the ranks of the Israeli political process as well, through Deputy Speaker of the Knesset now, all the way to the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, their top ambassador at the world's largest international organization. I wanted to ask Ambassador Danone specifically. I know the U.S. support, and listen, I always like to, Ambassador, as you do, kind of separate out the government of the U.S. and the people, because I believe still that the people, I know our listeners of the U.S. are very supportive of Israel. But I'm worried about our government right now, specifically the administration and what they're moving at the United Nations with these kind of resolutions. Is the U.S. giving Israel enough support to kind of, because at the Security Council, the U.S. can put a stop to any of this?
Exactly. The main support for Israel at the UN is the support we get at the Security Council. And the U.S. can veto any resolution being one of the P5 at the Security Council. And it happened last time in 2011 when the Palestinians submitted a resolution against Israel. 14 members out of 15 supported, and the U.S. stood with Israel and supported us and vetoed the decision. We heard and we read some reports that maybe there will be a UN resolution that will be submitted by the administration. We don't think it will be constructive, because I think the people in the administration understand that both sides need to go back to the negotiation, and you cannot impose a solution on the side. So the best thing to do is to call for the renewal of the direct negotiations.
And that seems to be one of the things I think we've got to emphasize here. We're joined again by our good friend, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danone. Ambassador, let me ask you this question, because this ties into something you and I were talking about just 2 days ago, and that the boycott, divestiture, and sanction. There's attempts, and I think it's important for our audience to understand this. There are multiple attempts to delegitimize the state of Israel. Some of those come in the form of UN resolutions, where Israel's the target of those more than any other country in the world. There's a recent report that came out of the State Department I'm not too happy about. I'll talk about that in a moment. But there's also this attempt in the universities around the world to delegitimize Israel, and that anyone that stands up for Israel will be really challenged, including boycotts, divestiture, and sanctions put in place. Now, Ambassador, I know this is something that you're very concerned about in your role as ambassador to the United Nations, and we've been dealing with this all over the world. We've been successful in 6 cases in the United States. We're working on several in Europe. We've got a brand new case, and an interesting situation there. The student involved in the newest case is not Jewish. He's Hindu, from India, president of a major college's graduate student association. He stood up for Israel, and he's been vehemently opposed on his campus beyond free speech. I mean, horrible allegations. And the reality is this BDS movement, boycott, divestiture, and sanction, Ambassador, has been something that is very significant and is close to your heart, and something I know we're going to be working on together to stop.
Well, we see that there is a new wave of anti-Semitism. Today, it is not politically correct to say I'm an anti-Semite. So it's much more easy to say I'm against Israel, period. And we see the BDS got into the UN. We heard about the decision to create a database of Israeli companies that are making any businesses with people in Judea and Samaria. This is the kind of BDS we are facing. And also here in campuses, I cannot accept the fact that people who support Israel will be afraid to walk on campus in New York or in California. It shouldn't be the case. We need to stand together, and at the end of May, we will hold a major event at the UN on this issue, and we do want to see our partners standing with us, Christians, Jews, and also Muslims, who understand that this is not the way to promote anything in the Middle East by boycotting Israel.
Well, we look forward to working with you on that project and on the entire BDS movement. We have a team of lawyers at the ACLJ that handle these BDS cases. Let me return our attention to current situation. The negotiations, Ambassador, with the Palestinian Authority right now, with the political difficulties and dynamics with Hamas, could you give everyone a sense of what the lay of the land is in Israel right now on the politics of what's going on with potential negotiations with the Palestinian Authority, with Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen?
Well, the reality is not so great. As you know, there is no negotiations. In the last 7 years, Prime Minister Netanyahu urged Mahmoud Abbas to sit down and negotiate, and the last time they negotiated was for a few hours, a few years ago. So we don't see any negotiations in the near future, unfortunately. We are willing to negotiate. And also we have to remember that Hamas is in charge of Gaza. So even when we will negotiate with the Palestinian Authority, it will be only with the Palestinian Authority and not with Hamas. And that is a major issue that people tend to forget about it that today there is an occupation in Gaza. Hamas is occupying Gaza. There are no elections, no human rights, and that is a major part that we tend to ignore.
One of the things that, Ambassador, I know you know this, we've done work putting Israel's position forward at international tribunals. I've appeared multiple times at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. We were successful, and Israel was absolved of liability, which, of course, there should have not been a case anyways. But I think it's important for folks to hear from you, especially our listeners and members around the country, how important it is, the work that we're doing at the ACLJ, whether it's at the UN or in these other international tribunals, for the defense of Israel and Israel's legitimacy as a Jewish state. How important that work is.
It is crucial to continue the fight, and we need our friends to stand with us. And I think it is a major contribution to our fight, that it's not only Jews fighting by themselves, but you have Jews and Christians together fighting the BDS. And I think when you take the case into court and you do it professionally and you win the case, it is a major win because people look at it. And many professors and many campuses, they're analyzing the cases, and I think it's crucial to continue, not to be afraid to take those cases to court and to fight it, because being silent, that's exactly what the BDS is all about, to keep the supporters of Israel silent, and we should not do that.
Well, we're doing exactly that. We're going to court, as you know. We're looking forward to working with you at the end of May at the United Nations. Ambassador, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Jay.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. Our guest was Ambassador Danny Danon. You heard what he said, folks. We're getting ready to take a break. You need to stand with Israel, and you could do it right now. Go to aclj.org, sign that petition. But you also heard what he said. We need to go to court. We need to continue to go into court, and we're fighting on these issues around the country, frankly, around the world. Our offices all over the globe are united in defense of Israel. aclj.org, or you can call in and sign it there at 1-877-989-2255. So aclj.org or 1-877-989-2255. It is time to stand with Israel. Do it today.
Israel is facing a new and grave danger, this time from the United States. There are reports that the Obama administration will use the UN Security Council against Israel. It's a renewed attempt to force Israel into a dangerous position, giving up key concessions before negotiations even begin and mandating that Israel accept indefensible borders. Israel must not be forced to negotiate with a Palestinian Authority that empowers terrorists. We can't allow President Obama to betray our ally, Israel. At the ACLJ, we're mobilizing our legal teams here and in Israel. We're preparing critical legal letters, documents, and filings at the UN, in Congress, and with the Obama administration. You can take a stand for Israel by signing on to our new petition right now. Defend Israel. No talks with terrorists. Call now. 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or you can add your name online, aclj.org.
There's an attack point right now where there's this attempt and a move to delegitimize the state of Israel. And we're fighting back on that on multiple fronts. I'll go to Jordan in a moment, but I want to go to Than Bennett because we're also fighting at the United Nations. We've just sent out a series of legal documents to the UN, Than, and let's get everybody kind of a sense of timing and what the two major issues are, because this is important for people to understand.
Well, you heard Ambassador Danon address both of these. There are two main resolutions that we're focused on, Jay. The one is a forced settlement between the Palestinians and Israel, one that would not be negotiated, but that would be forced through the UN. This is something that the United States has consistently vetoed at the Security Council, but last year they made a significant move, did not veto it until the very end, and as a result, it became within one vote of passing. That's resolution number one. The second one is the one that you heard the ambassador note, which is the one that condemns this so-called settlements. Back in 2011, that had 14 of the 15 votes in favor of. Only the United States was against it, and that is the one that it now looks like the United States is pulling back on. So we are engaging with both the United States to try to shore up their position. But, Jay, we have also taken this case to the other members of the Permanent Five, because if the United States takes the wrong position on this, we are going to need one of those other five countries to issue that veto. So we're engaging on both fronts right now.
There's also a situation, and I will tell you this, where the United States is putting unbelievable pressure on the UN. I want to play the statement from the Vice President of the United States, and I'm gonna comment and have Jordan comment. This is an unbelievable statement. We're an ally of Israel. Here's what Joe Biden, Vice President of the United States, had to say.
We have an overwhelming obligation, notwithstanding our sometimes overwhelming frustration with the Israeli government. We have an obligation to push them as hard as we can toward what they know in their gut is the only ultimate solution, a two-state solution. At the same time, be a guarantor, an absolute guarantor of their security.
You know, Jordan, what I find so ironic, and I hope our whole audience listened to that, is that Joe Biden says that the Israelis know in their heart the right thing to do, but they just won't do it. Well, the reality is what the president is proposing with the return to the pre-67 borders is indefensible. It's a suicide border pact. That's what it is. And you don't have a partner that recognizes your right to exist as a Jewish state. So it's very difficult to negotiate with someone who doesn't believe you have the right to exist in the first place.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And those kind of statements coming from the vice president, I think, signal where the U.S. is going at the United Nations. We just had Ambassador Danny Danon, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, on the broadcast. And the U.S., as he mentioned, in 2011 was the single country at this UN Security Council and one of the 5 permanent members, but the only one that stopped one of these Palestinian resolutions. If the U.S. were to work on one of those resolutions and this time reverse course and change what they did 5 years ago, you would have a move at the UN that would go through unanimously. So we have got to be very watchful. When you see this rhetoric from Vice President Biden, I think that's more of a signal of what the U.S. could be preparing at the international stage in these final months of the Obama presidency.
We've had some great comments come in from Facebook. I'm also going to take your calls in just a minute. Grace on Facebook wrote, "Thank you for having UN Ambassador Danny Danon speak to America. We are praying for Israel." It's not every day you get this the ambassador to the United Nations coming off the floor of the UN to do this. We're thrilled he was able to do it, working into his schedule. Sandra on Facebook says, "Israel has been a great ally to the U.S. and security-wise, they have been a blessing." There's no doubt about it. It protects our own interests in the region. It's not just Israel we're protecting. They're protecting our interests in the region, too, which includes multiple things, as you can imagine. The stability factor in the region there is significant. We did get a question from Taz, and that is on Facebook. What is the BDS movement? We talked about it at the end of the interview. That is a movement to delegitimize the state of Israel, mostly through businesses, divestiture and sanctions. That's where they don't invest in Israeli goods, don't buy Israeli goods, or boycott Israeli goods, or boycott Israeli academics and harassing pro-Israel students. Those include Christian students. As I told Ambassador Danon, we've got a case involving right now a Hindu student that's pro-Israel. We're going to go right to the phones. Jenny is calling from New York on line 1. Hi, Jenny.
Hi. Thank you, Jay, so much for giving people like me who feel a little overwhelmed by all of this, like a chance to sign the petition on the ACLJ.org or to support financially. So thank you.
Thank you.
And also thanks to the ambassador, and I'm so thankful for Israel's patience and wisdom with us.
Yeah.
And I am praying that God will bless them for that. And I do want to remind people to be in prayer and fasting in addition to the other ways to
let me jump in here for a second, Jay, and then ask your question. That is, the Israelis have learned that sometimes you have to suffer through administrations that are hostile to your position. And you have an administration right now that's hostile to the position. There's an op-ed, I mentioned this earlier, that is published in the Israeli National News. It is from the parent of, who's an attorney in New Jersey, Stephen Flatow. He is the father of Alicia Flatow, who was murdered in an Iranian-sponsored Palestinian terrorist attack in 1995. And President Obama has the State Department issuing a report condemning Israel for defending their soldiers. And this is absurd, but this is where the administration's gone, and so we're fighting back. But go ahead with your comment, Jenny.
Yeah, it makes me want to cry and scream.
But just don't do that. You know what you need to do? Pray and stay engaged. Help us do what you're doing. By you say support the ACLJ, it makes a big difference. We're able to go to the UN. We have offices in Jerusalem. We're not just talking about it on a radio broadcast. We're doing it. But go ahead with the last part of your question.
Absolutely. And I think that's why prayer is key, and it may be part of an answer to my question, because God can change the heart of man. But any thoughts on why?
Well, I'll tell you what it is. There's been a move since the founding of the State of Israel to delegitimize Israel. And that's what this is. These are moves to delegitimize the State of Israel and the Jewish people. And I call it anti-Semitism. And Danny Danon, the ambassador, said that it's a new form of anti-Semitism. Because you can't, saying you're anti-Semitic, that's not very politically, calculable. You can't say that and get away with that anymore. But you could be really hard or unreasonable the state of Israel and try to delegitimize it. And that's what's going on here. And the motives of the administration, I think, Jordan, go back to the fact that the president doesn't want anything that's going to impact how he's viewed within the Muslim world. Yet, let me say this, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Egypt, they're backing Israel.
Yeah, and I mean,
not Iran, which is who the president put a partnership with.
That relationship is starting to really fall apart, especially with Saudi Arabia. And it's not like Saudi Arabia is perfect by any extent, the human rights issues there. But they are internationally a key ally for the United States and should be a key ally in the battle against ISIS as well and be more responsible. So while we talk about these issues, we have to realize that what the president has done is always used rhetoric that's been worrisome when it comes to Israel. But as Ambassador Danone said, that ultimately the administration may say some things, and we know they've caught them even off mic saying things where they thought they weren't public, but ultimately has done the right thing at the international level when it comes directly to Israel. I'm not saying when it comes to the battle against ISIS, because I don't think their strategy is working at all. But when it comes to Israel, we're nervous that this time around they may not do what they did in 2011. Let me explain why very quickly. President Obama will not be on the ballot again. Now, he wasn't then either, but he is also not going to be the kind of leading the charge for Democrats either. It will be whoever the Democrat presidential nominee is. So those who may disagree with him and need to for political purposes will be open to, and so it won't bind the Democrats politically in the U.S., though it should, it won't.
Folks, we're at a critical time in our fight for Israel. We've got a petition up right now. It says, stand with Israel, no negotiation with terrorists. You don't negotiate with people that call for your elimination. And we also have a matching challenge campaign going on at the same time. So we want you to sign the petition at aclj.org, or you can call us at 1-877-989-2255. Sign that petition. Stand with Israel. Scriptures are clear. I'll bless those that bless thee, curse those that curse thee. Let's stand with Israel. It protects our own country, and it's that important. The region and the United States, for the sake of our children and our children's children. ACLJ.org, 1-877-989-2255. You can sign the petition there. And of course, we always appreciate your support for the work of the ACLJ. And either way, ACLJ.org or 877-989-2255. That's going to do it for the broadcast today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Israel is facing a new and grave danger, this time from the United States. There are reports that the Obama administration will use the UN Security Council against Israel. It's a renewed attempt to force Israel into a dangerous position, giving up key concessions before negotiations even begin and mandating that Israel accept indefensible borders. Israel must not be forced to negotiate with a Palestinian Authority that empowers terrorists. We can't allow President Obama to betray our ally, Israel. At the ACLJ, we're mobilizing our legal teams here and in Israel. We're preparing critical legal letters, documents, and filings at the UN, in Congress, and with the Obama administration. You can take a stand for Israel by signing on to our new petition right now. Defend Israel. No talks with terrorists. Call now. 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or you can add your name online, aclj.org.